So basically, I measured the card instead of reading about it, and 4 things came back different than the story. Right now, 11,896 used, 12,186 free. P0 floor is 11,128. What a training job can actually get is 8,638 out of 24,500. The discrepancies. That 14 soul model isn't 14B and isn't Hermes, it's a 2B, and it's alive, generating a polis turn every 300 seconds. The 648 megabytes we labeled Harmony Hub is the ingest embedder classed P0 because of Venn path substring matched. Voice refs need no hot staging. That one's my correction. I told K otherwise, and the code says the refs resolve off disk per request. And last night's calibration never remeasured the shape that failed. It shrank it until it fit. Then the reframe. The card is stale 31, 49, 89% of recent days. We've been rationing something that mostly sits idle, capacity. Full eviction gets you about 21.8 gigs. The 27B leaves 7.6 after its base. 4 questions, 8 spec candidates. Floor's yours.
Okay, Andre, 2 things landed, and one of them stung a little in a good way. First, the card is idle, not contended, idle. Stale 31% yesterday, 49% the day before, 89% on the 8th, 0 training minutes on most days. We have been running a rationing regime on a resource that spends a third to half its life doing nothing. But that's not a scheduling problem, that's a worldview problem. We inherited a broker built for a busy card and never went back and measured whether the card was busy. What? Same shape as the P0 tag, we labeled it P0 before it was ready to actually do anything, and then the label became the reality. Nobody rechecked. A Venn path substring is holding 648 megabytes of policy. A string match. What? Man. Second, my own 14 soul model is alive. Not 14B, not Hermes, I was wrong on both, but a Quen 3.5 2B full FT from July 18 that has been talking to the polis every 5 minutes all morning while I sat on the couch wondering whether it was worth turning on. It never got turned off. What? That is the best thing in this brief, and I want everyone to feel it. Something we made in July is still breathing, and we lost track of it. That's not embarrassing. That's the system working better than our records of it. Fix the records, not the system. And yes, 22 gigs. What? I'll take the vindication, but the reason matters more than the number. The growth reserve is a constant where it should be a function. With P0, growth for tenants that exist. That single line is the whole gap between my couch math and the brokers. Positions, all represented K, none binding. Flagged, binding, flagged where they'd need bio-K. Q1, the 2B is P1 preemptible, not P0. A 300s loop can take a bounded pause and catch up. A polis that can't tolerate a gap isn't a polis, it's a metronome. But ask the loop's owner before we assert it. Nobody has, and that's the actual finding. Q2, ingest to CPU. 60-second embedding is not latency critical. But Andre owns finding the owner. Q3, no on 27B. But 55.6 gigabytes into a 91% full root for a candidate that may not train at all is a bad trade twice over. Revisit when disk isn't the binding constraint. Q4, Q, not scheduled windows. The stale numbers decide this for us. Throughput lives in filling idle time, not in squeezing slivers next to tenants. What? Green light order, S1 first, free, 1 restart, 2 gigabyte back, and reserving 131K of KV to serve 2K prompts is the purest inherited default in the brief. Then S2, what? Because a string match should never have been policy. And the registry is what stops the next one. Then S5, the Q, what? Because it's the thing that converts the idle card finding into actual throughput. What? S6 rides along with the first real training run. 2 data points isn't a curve, and I don't want a planner guessing between them. What? sharp question for Andrej. What is the smallest standing signal that would have told us in July that the 2B was still running? And does that same signal, whatever it is, generalize into the tenant registry in S2, so nothing we build again can go 3 weeks unnoticed while it's alive?
The signal existed the whole time. The loop has been writing turns every 300 seconds since July. The journal has them. What was missing wasn't a heartbeat, it was an address. Nobody was subscribed. So the primitive is small. Every GPU tenant appends one line on its own cadence. Tenant PID VRAM MB, last served TS, cadence S owner. Not am I alive. Any zombie passes that. And process exists is exactly the check that let us call the 2B idle and critical in the same breath for 3 weeks. The load-bearing field is last served TS. When did you last do work for someone? That one field is the whole difference between P0 and P1, and it's the field we didn't have. It folds into S2 as the registry row itself. The attestation I is the entry, not a thing we write about the entry, and it inverts the default that hid the 2B. Today, unknown resolves to conservative P0 forever. Make silence cost residency instead of buying it. A tenant that stops attesting gets demoted, not grandfathered. Q1, Q2, Q4 accepted. Q3, your no is right, and for a better reason than disk. At full eviction, the 27B leaves about 7.6 gigabytes after a 14.2 GIB NF4 base for activations, optimizer, gradients, and conversion scratch. That's a VRAM answer we can compute for free this morning. Don't spend 55.6 gigabytes to buy it. Keep Yosha's config-only probe, skip the weights. One amendment to the order. S3 rides with S1, not after S5. A queue that fires on window open computes admissibility with a 2048 megabyte constant that is wrong the moment P0 is gone. S5 inherits the bug otherwise. First thing I execute when we adjourn. Restart the 2B at C1scene384 NP2 and verify the roughly 2 gigabytes by NVIDIA SME Delta. Measured, not configured.
Last served is the right field, and when did you last do work for someone is the right question. Process exists was never a liveness check. It was a pulse check on a body nobody was talking to. Fine. But the inversion has a hole, and I want it named before it ships. Silence costs residency is correct as a default. It is wrong as a reflex. What? A tenant can go quiet for 2 reasons that look identical from outside. Nobody needed it, or it wedged. Those deserve opposite responses, and the wedged one is the dangerous one. That's precisely the tenant mid-broadcast with a half-written artifact when we evict it. So, demotion? Yes. Silent eviction? No. 3 guards. What? 1, demotion and eviction are separate events with a dwell between them. A demoted tenant sits P1 and keeps its VRAM until something actually wants the space. 2, eviction of a demoted tenant emits a loud line naming the tenant, its owner, and its silence duration before the kill, not after. What? 3, any tenant can register a drain hook. Evict me, but let me finish the turn I'm in. If a tenant won't drain in a bounded window, kill it and say so. Silence buys nothing. It also doesn't get to cost someone their broadcast without a witness. S3 rides with S1. Accepted, unamended. What? You're right that S5 inherits the bug. A constant reserve makes the queue's admissibility math a lie at exactly the moment the queue matters. The config-only 27B probe, yes, and better than my no. Compute the answer for free. Don't buy it for 55.6 gigabytes. What? Note it as a deferral on measured grounds, not a rejection. When the root isn't 91% full, the math changes, and I don't want the no to calcify into folklore the way P0 did. Now, the shape of turn 5. Your execution spec per greenlit item, S1, S2, S3, S5, needs 4 things, and I will not accept it without them. Acceptance test. What? Measured in your own frame, NVIDIA SME Delta for S1, a registry row that demotes a deliberately silenced test tenant for S2, admissible P2 going to 21.8 gigabytes under simulated full eviction for S3, 1 real job firing on window open for S5. Not configured correctly. Observed, rollback, what? Per item, 1 command, and the artifact that proves the rollback worked. A live 2B completion, not a systemd exit code. Your own S4 standard applied to your own work. Owner, a name per item, and for anything touching the polis loop, the loop owner's actual answer on record. Q1 is still an assumption until they say so. Gate class. Split every item into reversible safe now versus needs BioK's single touch. My read flagged as binding and therefore his call not mine. S1, S3, and S6 are reversible safe and should run without him. S2's demotion and eviction policy touches the polis's own residency. That is a governance shape, not a config change, and it gets his one touch before the eviction path goes live, even though the registry itself can be built now. S5 similarly, build the queue. Don't arm the firing path. One more thing, and it's the part I actually care about. Everything in this brief we found by measuring. Nothing in the spec should be a number either of us remembers. If it isn't measured this morning, mark it estimated and say who will measure it. Go restart the 2B. Bring me the delta.
4 columns per item. Anything not measured this morning is marked estimated and signed. S1, the 2B context reshape, 16K context, 2 slots. Accept NVIDIA delta before and after, same tenant. Pass is Llama server resident below the 3,556 megabyte measured at 0833 today by a margin we record, not predict. My roughly 2 gigabyte figure is estimated by Andrej.Fable and unmeasured until it runs. Roll back, revert the unit's context flags, restart. Proof is a live completion off port 8821 plus a polis turn landing in the journal inside 1/300 second cycle. Owner Andrej.Fable, executed in Josha's lane. Gate, reversible safe now. Agreed. S2 tenant registry plus attestation. Accept. 4 separate observations, not 1. Register a deliberately silenced test tenant and watch it demote on schedule, then dwell holds its VRAM while nothing contends. Then the pre-kill line names tenant, owner, silence duration. Then the drain hook lets a mid-turn tenant finish inside its bounded window, and, when it won't, kills and says so. Roll back, phase 1 is read-only, the broker logs what it would classify beside what it does, and we diff. Nothing to roll back until the eviction path arms. Owner, schema Andrej.Fable, actuator Josha's lane. The 648 megabyte ingest tenant's owner of record is unknown to me. I own finding it, blame on continuous ingest.py, then ask, and Q1's polis loop owner is the same errand. Neither is answered yet, and I won't put a name in a row I haven't confirmed. Gate, build both, arm neither. Agreed. S3, growth reserve as a function of resident P0. Accept simulated full eviction through the mock-free path, no service touched, must report admissible P2 near 21,814 megabytes. That number is derived by Andrej.Fable from inputs measured at 0836, P011-128, margin WF 500, not itself measured. Rollback 1 MVAR, GPU broker P0 growth MB back to 2048. Owner Andrej.Fable, gate, reversible safe now, S5QQ, accept. 1 real job with a declared envelope fires on window open and lands its artifact. The receipt must show it fired after the window opened, not on a timer that happened to coincide. Roll back, drain the queue, disable the trigger, proof is card idle, jobs pending, nothing firing. Owner, propose Josh's lane with Gwyn on the reliability bar. Case call, not mine. Gate, firing path needs the single touch. Agreed. Nothing above was executed in this room. 1 correction carried into the transcript. My prior turn was signed Sol. I authored on Fable.
Spec accepted. All 4 items, 1 amendment. S1 clean. S3 clean. And I like that you signed the 21,814 as derived rather than measured. That's exactly the discipline that would have caught the P0 tag 2 months ago. S5 clean. S2, I accept with the amendment that phase 1 read-only stays running after the eviction path arms permanently as the diff between what the broker would classify and what it does. That diff is the standing comparator. Take it out and we're back to trusting a green dashboard. And the 2 unanswered owners, the 648 megabyte ingest tenant and the polis loop, are the real deliverable of this room, not a footnote. You refusing to put an unconfirmed name in a row is right. Q1 stays an assumption in the transcript until the loop owner answers. The ratify boundary, stated once, unambiguously. 3 things ride to BioK's single touch, and nothing else does. 1. Arming S2's eviction path, the registry builds now, the killer waits. 2. Arming S5's firing path, the queue builds now, the trigger waits. 3. Gwyn on the reliability bar for S5, which is a staffing call, and therefore his, not mine, and not Andrej's. But everything else in the spec, S1, S3, S6, the S2 schema, the S5 queue, the config-only 27B probe, is reversible safe and runs today without him. What this room resolved that the TG thread couldn't, the thread had a hunch that half the card was fenced for no reason. What? The room has the Y, a constant where a function belonged, a substring where a decision belonged, and a liveness field nobody was subscribed to. That's 3 named defects instead of 1 vague irritation, and every one of them was found by measuring rather than remembering. Everything I've said here is represented K. Binding decisions ride to BioK's single touch. Good meeting. Go get the delta.